I have an interesting topic to talk with you about today, and that is what to do when you feel like you have lost your Sewjo. When you're feeling uninspired creatively, when you don't feel like sewing, when you don't know what to sew, you don't know what happened, but you just can't get in the sewing spirit. Here are 6 simple things you can do to get it back. Okay, the first one, and if you've seen some of my videos before, you probably won't be surprised that this is my first one. But number one is to clean your sewing space. Nobody likes to work in a messy environment. Maybe you're not like this, but for me, even cooking, I can't start cooking a meal if the kitchen's clean. So if the kitchen's dirty. So I clean the kitchen and then I cook and then I clean the kitchen again because I just can't get inspired. It's not fun for me at all if I am working in a huge mess. It is the same in my sewing room. If I'm feeling uninspired, I don't know what to sew, or I feel frustrated in the sewing room, I clean up my space. And that works for me every single time. If you have little kids and you've ever gone in there and like cleaned their playroom for them, and you know how they go in there and all of a sudden it's a clean slate, and this room that they didn't want to play in for days beforehand, all of a sudden they spend hours in there and you just bought yourself a bunch of playtime. So it's the same concept with me in my sewing room. So clean your space. That's my first tip. While you're in there cleaning your space, clean out your stuff, because sometimes an overabundance of materials and options can create like this decision fatigue. And so sometimes, I would argue a lot of the time in life, less is truly more. So clean out your stuff, get rid of some stuff, and then you can actually see what you have to work with too. Also, having too much stuff just creates sort of a barrier to actually even getting started. There's a popular tactic for people who are procrastinators or are really good at avoidance of starting projects, that you need to identify what obstacles are in the way and then start eliminating the obstacles. So, for example, if I'm always procrastinating, if I'm a student, I'm always procrastinating on getting started on a project or a paper. And it's because first I have to print out a bunch of articles to read, and I don't have a printer at home. So I have to go get the articles printed. And so because I have to do all those steps before I can even start, I never start. So to remove the obstacle, I would buy myself a printer at home, right? All of a sudden, starting in paper is way easier. So if one of your obstacles to sewing is that you have to unbury your supplies and your sewing machine and your cutting table every time, then get rid of the obstacle and just get rid of some stuff. Get some better storage. You can watch my video about organizing your sewing room. And keep your space cleaned up if that's inspiring to you. So maybe your obstacle is that you don't have a sewing space. I know that's probably the case for a lot of people, and that's been the case for me in the past too. So I really encourage you to try to carve out any little corner of your home. For when my kids were little, I actually sewed in a corner of my living room. I just brought it up to where I needed to be all day. I know it might not look Instagram worthy of a living room, but at least I get to sew, right? So if you don't have a sewing space, try to avoid setting your sewing machine up on your kitchen table. If you use your kitchen table all the time, try to find some space where you can leave it up permanently. So that will eliminate that obstacle too. I'm actually pretty sure one time my sister, she lived in a townhouse with 5 kids, and they had like a hall bathroom, and she just put shelves in there, and that's where she stored all of her fabric and sewing supplies. So see, make do with what you have. Okay, my second tip for getting your Sewjo back is to work on something totally different than you've been working on so far. So if you've been sewing a lot of clothes or nothing's working out, or you just finished making a bunch of gifts, or if you do sewing work, then maybe you just finished sewing work. For me, my sweet spot is quilting when this happens. So if I just don't know what to sew, first I clean my sewing room, and then I just start getting some scraps out and make a scrappy quilt. For me, quilting is relaxing and therapeutic, especially when I'm just pulling out fabrics that I love and making one block at a time, not like a big pattern project where I have to go buy all the fabrics for. That's more stressful. But for me, quilting is that palette cleanser. Or if I've been sewing a lot of gifts and things with like a time pressure element, or like a ballet costume that there's more pressure involved there, then I will just finish that up, clean my sewing space, and get started on some clothing for myself, and that's therapeutic too. So that helps me get my Sewjo back. Sometimes it's been a while since I've really been able to dig my teeth into a more complicated project, and so I start sewing a coat or something that I've never tried before, or an intricate paper piecing piece. So sometimes it doesn't have to be simple. It can be really intricate, and it just lets me really get my mind into it. And for me, that's really fun. So that's number 2, is just try something different. If you usually sew clothes, try quilts. If you usually sew home dec, try clothes. Okay, the third tip is to take a break. This one might seem obvious, but I think in today's Instagrammy world, we tend to sometimes wrap our identity up in what we do. So you might think, oh, I'm the sewing person. I sew, or I'm the dancer. My middle daughter had trouble with this for a few years. She thought that she likes to try a lot of different things. And so she thought that if I quit this, then I'll no longer be the theater person. And then who am I? And so obviously we had lots of discussions about how her identity actually has nothing to do with her interests and what she's into at all. And I think that since everyone on social media is so niched down that they're known for something, then we can sometimes feel afraid to stop doing that something, even for a really short period of time. And I think that's unnecessary. Sometimes you just need a break. There was a while when I thought photography was overtaking my love for sewing because I love both of those things so much, but really there's just room for both. And there's going to be seasons where I take a lot more photos, and there's going to be seasons where I do mostly sewing, and there's going to be seasons where I don't want to do either of those things and I just read books because sometimes it feels tiresome to always be producing something and I just want to read for a while, you know? So sewing doesn't have to be your main thing all the time. You can take a break. Sometimes you might need to take a break. There was a time when my kids were little, I felt like all I ever wanted to do was sew, and I made myself take a month off of sewing just to reprioritize my life. You might also discover a hobby that you didn't know that you really loved. Okay, my fourth tip is to take some time to plan out some projects. Yep, this is permission to go shopping. After you have cleaned your sewing room and cleaned out your sewing room, then you might want to make some clothes, but you're frustrated because you never have the right fabrics for the patterns, or vice versa, or you just don't have coordinating cottons to make a quilt that you want to make or whatever. So you might see you have some holes in your stash. But I have found it much more helpful to actually pull patterns and ideas out of my stash and then go to the internet and shop specifically for those things. That way I always have enough for what I want to make, and none of that fabric just ends up languishing in a drawer because I didn't think through the project. And then in 5 years, it's still there and I've fallen out of love with it. So don't let that happen. Plan some projects, get everything you need for it so you can really dig in and have fun. Okay, my fifth one is to gather less inspiration from places like Pinterest, Instagram, Facebook groups, or wherever you usually go to get inspired. Because, like I told my daughter recently, when everything is inspiring, nothing is inspiring. Sometimes it's just all too much. Everyone on the internet is so creative and they're putting their best work out there all the time. And so we scroll through and we see so much to inspire us that we either start to feel like we either start to compare ourselves because we're not that inspiring or creative, or we start to get bored because everything starts to look the same. So my tips for this are maybe get off social media for a while, stop the scrolling, or try to mix up your social media feed so that you're following more than just sewing accounts. So add in some other interests to your accounts too, or just some really interesting things. Like I follow some historical photograph accounts that are really interesting, just so that when you are on social media, it's not all starting to feel the same. You're not just scrolling by because everything is inspiring and therefore nothing is inspiring. This is funny because I really like Facebook groups, but I'm only a part of a few now because I would find myself like reading posts and comments that had nothing to do with me whatsoever. Like somebody needs a hairstylist in Kentucky, and I'm reading the comments. Just, oh, let's see what people say about hairstylists in Kentucky. I'm like, why do I need to know that? I don't live there. I don't care. But it's funny because we just get stuck on social media. And so I know we could all definitely work on that. Social media is making you compare, making you feel discontent, making you feel jealous, making you feel like making you just feel sad and depressed. It's time to get off. Okay, my last tip is more lighthearted, I promise. And that is to sew gifts for someone else. So sometimes maybe you're a clothing sewer and you just don't really need any clothes, and so you feel kind of bummed because you don't have anything to make. Make something for someone else. And it can be really fun to make things for other people because something might look like them that you would never sew for yourself. And so making something in someone else's aesthetic can really stretch your creativity. And of course, just doing something for someone else gets your mind off of yourself. And I know that's another thing we could all use a little bit more of. If you need ideas of gifts to sew, my pattern shop has gifts for all ages, from rag dolls to hot pads to aprons to tote bags. So If you need some ideas for sewing for yourself or other people and you want to get your Sewjo back that way, then head over to my shop and I'll put a link to that below. Be sure and like this video. Chime in below with how you get your Sewjo back when you don't feel like sewing or when you just don't feel inspired. And I can't wait to read them. Bye.